Welcome again to Reviews from Purgatory with J. Matt Wygand, and I finally begin reviewing things for October. A few years back, I rented the TNT Nightmares and Dreamscapes miniseries. It was based on the work of Stephen King, and what I remember most vividly from this series was it being so boring I fell asleep. Although there are a few that are okay, somehow they managed to make most of them entirely lifeless. And speaking of lifeless, guess what reviewer read all 8 short stories for the purpose of this review? Yeah, I know. It's really kind of sad, isn't it? Write how sad it is in the comments. I'm not going to make that a habit, but I think it was worth it this time. After all, I got some really good material from that, as you'll see in the episode summaries. The show is called Nightmares and Dreamscapes because 5 of the short stories come from that short story collection, with 1 from Night Shift and 2 from Everything's Eventual. I could start making generalizations about the show here, but that would be unfair. Really, each episode has its own flaws that drag it down. They don't all have the same flaw. It's more like they got some diversity in their horrible problems here. And there are a couple episodes that are actually worth watching. Grudging praise. The first episode, Battleground, is about the struggle between Hitman Renshaw and the Green Army men of his last victim, Toymaker Hans Morris. They have a huge battle throughout his entire apartment, and without any dialogue, it's just mesmerizing. It's a great episode, and unfortunately none of the other episodes in the series live up to this standard. Crouch End is easily the scariest and best story in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. In the show, it's easily the worst one, but it's so terribly done that it's actually kind of enjoyable, so I'll do a spotlight on that. While the spotlight will allow me to go into depth on it, to put it succinctly, Crouch End is the story of a couple that gets lost in a strange part of London where unusual and horrific events start to happen to them. And the episode screws all that up through poor direction, bad acting, horrible CGI. Even the music sucks. Umney's Last Case. The fictional private eye Clyde Umney switches places with the writer who made him. The writer, Sam Landry, escapes the horrors of his own life by entering the fantasy world he created, replacing Clyde Umney as the private eye there, and forcing Clyde Umney into the real world. Umney is not very happy about that, but he's powerless to stop it. The episode and the short story are wildly different. I'm going to be describing these short stories here, and since it would be weird to just show the cover of their collection to you while I describe them for 30 seconds, I will instead illustrate with terribly done stick figures. Enjoy. While in the short story, Sam Landry flees into the fantasy world because there's nothing left. His wife has killed herself after the tragic death of their son, and he's all alone out there in the real world. So he hides in the fantasy world and forces Clyde Umney out of it. Then Umney, in the real world, sits there plotting how he will get back into the fantasy world and slit the writer's throat. Technically, these ones are inaccurate. He doesn't actually get to go back and kill Sam Landry. Though why would he? Because, if Sam Landry created him and that entire fictional universe, wouldn't killing Sam Landry destroy said fictional universe? The episode comes off a lot more light-hearted, despite the dark subject matter. Detective Clyde Umney shows up in the real world, where he encounters Mrs. Landry, who is still alive in the episode, and he comforts her in her grief. However, he's not very loyal to her, so he decides to play around with the pool girl. This finishes breaking Mrs. Landry, who then kills herself. And the writer, still in the fantasy world, looks out and laments, "What have I done?" The episode coasts over some of the darker elements and inserts more comedic elements, thereby making an overall lighthearted episode despite the very dark ending. This isn't to say that King's short story is entirely humorless either. He does a good job of imitating Raymond Chandler's writing style while lovingly mocking it. Like how the secretary, Candy Cane, leaves because she's tired of being called Candy Cane. Her name is Arlene, you jackass. What I miss most between the episode and the short story is that the episode has no ambiguity. Umney's wandering around interacting with people. Boy, is he ever interacting with people. The short story, you weren't really sure if the writer had switched places with a character from his novel, or if the writer had a psychotic break, and now he was living as a recluse, thinking he was a character from his own novel. Despite how different both versions are, I like them. In fact, because of how they're different, I really like them. They're each their own thing, one kind of a comedy more or less, and the other more serious. William H. Macy gets to play Sam Landry and Clyde Umney. I think he really likes playing Clyde Umney. Puts on his 1930s detective voice, and yeah. Jacqueline McKenzie was great in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and she's fair here. She gets to play the wife, be all distraught, and so on. Tori Musette, who plays the secretary at the beginning, and the pool girl later on, is a Hollywood tragedy. I don't mean like she OD'd on drugs or something. I mean that she's most famous for a scene from The Matrix Reloaded. You go to Hollywood with dreams of making it big, and your best role is chocolate cake orgasm. You probably noticed that the fictional Clyde Umney and the world he inhabits in the story is pre-World War II Raymond Chandler-esque America. And they do a good job of bringing that across, making it feel like Los Angeles of that era. The costumes, the vehicles, the settings, it comes off very believably. The end of the whole mess. I was going to talk about this one here, but I got so angry talking about it, and I spoke so long about it, that I realized I needed to do a spotlight about this one. Let me just say this here. The end of the whole mess is a story about two brothers and how much they love each other. Oh, and the end of the world happens in it too. But it's secondary to that whole brotherly love thing. It's a story so saccharine that it'll give you diabetes. Let's travel onward with the road virus heads north. Horror author Richard Kinnell picks up a disturbing painting at a yard sale and realizes that the thing depicted in the painting is following him and intends to kill him when it catches up. Now the short story, that's all it is, because King is very sharp about that. There's no ambiguity about the road virus heads north. It's a story about a writer who realizes, yeah, something supernatural's happening. He doesn't have any doubt. There's no ambiguity to it. It's not like, oh, maybe it's all in my head. I'm crazy. Or it's a hallucination. New medication must be... No. He's like, shit, something out of the ordinary is happening. Some entity from the basement of the universe is on my ass and it's going to kill me. So how'd they screw it up in the show? Well, they took the scary story and made it boring by stretching it out and padding it out with meaningless side plots. Peter Filardi decided to add ambiguity by giving the main character a cancer scare and then making him think, oh, all this horrible stuff with the picture, it must just be my anxiety that I might die from cancer. Richard Kinnell is played by Tom Berenger. He completely phones in this role. This cancer scare side plot leads to the second most embarrassing moment in Tom Berenger's career, where as he stares forward, colonoscopy footage is overlaid. A few minutes later, we see the most embarrassing moment of his career as we see the actual colonoscopy.
Let me know if you find my dignity up there.
Pretty sure that's not the character asking. What else is wrong with this besides Tom Berenger's poor acting and a cancer scare subplot that makes you question whether or not any of the stuff that's happening is real? Well, they decided to toss in a lot of jump scares, try to use music and camera filters to create tension and fear, but you know that won't work. You have to create tension with storytelling, with atmosphere, and if you use music, it can't be the only thing that tries to make this scary. It's a part of it. And they decide to throw in a new age healer ex-wife, and he's a pet dog, both of which are completely unnecessary to the story. The episode ends in a rushed climax that does not work because there hasn't been any real build-up of tension. Perhaps the most fundamental problem is that the painting itself is not scary in the episode. I think it's a little too polished looking, too normal. This painting should look horrific. It should be intimidating the moment you see it. Even when it morphs to the severed head version, it still isn't scary. In a moment here, I'm going to show you some images from Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. Why? Well, because this legendary graphic novel's artistic style is more what I think the painting should have been. The painting, as the main prop in that episode, needs to look, well, frightening. Needs to be otherworldly like this, hallucinatory, not so clear. All in all, the episode is a disappointing adaptation of a much better short story. The short story worked much better because it was streamlined and it didn't have that ambiguity of a cancer subplot or any of this other unimportant filler. Richard Kinnell just knew that the creature depicted in the painting was coming to kill him, and that it eventually would catch up. He dies while naked in the book. You know, if you're wondering about the little stick figure Wang. Autopsy Room 4. Howard Cottrell wakes up on the table, unable to move, speak, or do anything to convince them that he is alive. And every moment, they get a little closer to using the rib splitter in the short story or the face peeler in the episode. Before I get to the nuts and bolts of whether the short story is better than the episode or what have you, what's the difference between them, there's a story to this story. The short story Autopsy Room 4 first appeared in 6 stories in 1997, but was collected again in Everything's Eventual in 2002. In Everything's Eventual, King has notes at the end of every short story. And at the end of the Autopsy Room 4 one, he talks about Alfred Hitchcock Presents. You see, this story is kind of based on an episode he saw when he was a child, the one he thought was the scariest. Breakdown, the story of a man who is horribly injured in a car wreck, and everyone thinks he's dead because his neck is broken and he can't move. And they pack him into a body bag and he's almost cut open on the table. And that short story, that teleplay, is based on a short story from 1947. So what we have with this adaptation here is 4th generation of that story. In fact, Autopsy Room number 4 acknowledges these roots. Look at the background in this hotel room scene. The TV has that Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode on. It knows who its grandpappy is. It seems rather implausible that a couple would be having sex while watching an episode about a man getting crippled in a car crash. Doesn't seem very mood-inducing, does it? But, you know, nods to things don't always have to make any sense. Let's pause a minute here because I had something I wanted to say to you folks before we get to part 2. So I wanted to take a break here and talk to whoever is actually watching this video. I know I don't have many subscribers and not that many people see my videos, certainly. But I just wanted to take a moment out to thank you. Thank anyone who actually sees this stuff, actually cares, you know. Toast to you. I've got this bottle of Padre Pepe Elixir de Noci in here. It's a walnut-based liqueur. It's 42% alcohol by volume, so that's why it's really warm going down. A toast to anyone who's actually watching this, eh?